Today, we're going to use Word Mail Merge to send emails, but we're going to add in all the features that are missing from the standard version. Features such as the ability to add attachments, have a custom subject, and save the message in drafts so you can check it before it gets sent. Now this video followed on from a previous video where we used Word Mail Merge to create a series of PDF documents which we're then, in this video, going to send out to the recipients as an attachment. However, when we started looking into how we could do this, we realised that really the best thing to do was to properly enhance the Mail Merge to email system so that you can add in all the features that are missing. So what features have we added? My favourite is the ability to save the email in draft. If you've got an important email, the last thing you want to do is to close your eyes, press the go button and have 50 or 100 emails sent out which may have an error in it. So what we can do with this system is you click go, you have 50 drafts, you can then check each of them, and if you really want to, you can send each individually having checked it, or you can spot check a few, delete all the drafts and then hit go, knowing that those drafts will be sent out automatically. Next up, we have a custom subject. There's nothing worse for recipient engagement than giving them an email with a generic subject header. They might even just ignore it. So what we can do here is we can add in some kind of personal information to really make that email subject pop out at them so they read the email and are happy to receive it. Next up, we have attachments, the ability to add one or more custom documents to each email. We have the ability to choose the account it's sent from and to use the send as or send on behalf of features of the Exchange system. If you didn't know this, you can be set up by your admins so that you can send an email on behalf of either somebody else or on behalf of a team to which you're a member of. In the first case, this enables an assistant, for example, to send emails out on behalf of the CEO, and in the second case, it enables a team member to send out an email as the team rather than as an individual to give a very consistent appearance to the recipients. Finally, we've added in some very standard features, a CC, a BCC, delayed delivery, read receipts, delivery receipts, importance, and sensitivity. So how do we go about doing this? Firstly, we're going to give you a macro, which you can copy from our website and paste into Word to make that available to you. We'll take you through all the process of doing that in this video, so don't worry if you're not familiar with adding macros or anything like that. The macro reads the data for the email from the mail merge data itself. So having added the macro to Word, we'll then look at the data in Excel and add in all the fields that you can use to send your emails. Having done that and set up our example, we'll run it and show you how it all works. And then finally, right at the end, we will go through the macro line by line so that you know exactly what it's doing each and every step of the way. Now, the process of creating the PDFs we were able to do with a very simple macro. We deliberately simplified it and went through it at a level for people who are not necessarily familiar with VBA or macros. Unfortunately, this macro is a lot more complicated, so we'll be going through it at a higher level, assuming that people have an understanding of VBA. Nevertheless, we will go through every line so you know what it's doing. So that about covers it. Let's get to it. So here we are in Windows Explorer, where we have a folder containing the email template as a Word document, data in an Excel spreadsheet, and a folder called PDFs, which contain the attachments that we're going to apply to each of the emails. Now, all of this is on SharePoint in a site called Demo. MailMerge and VBA don't play that well with SharePoint, so we have synced it so that it appears as if it's local to our computer. So firstly, let's look at the template in Word and add our macro. So here is our letter template. We have already set up the mail merge in Mailings. We've selected the recipients and linked it to the spreadsheet. We simply have a dear known as, that's the only mail merge field in the email itself. And then we've got please find attached your letter. Now, of course, you can make the body of the email as complex as you want with as many mail merge fields as you desire. The only other thing to note about this template is that we have copied and pasted the signature from my email into this. Now, it is possible to have the system add in the default signature. However, given we give the ability to change accounts and indeed send an email as someone else, it turns out to be easier to copy and paste the correct signature into the body of the email explicitly, and therefore you know exactly what you're adding to your email. So this is the template. We don't need to look at it much more. Let's go about adding our macro. So the way we add a macro is via the developer tab up here. Now, for some of you, it won't be available. It is hidden by default. And all you need to do is to right click in the ribbon and go to customize the ribbon. And on the right hand side here, you'll be able to just check the box next to developer, and this will make the developer tab appear. And the buttons we're interested in are here Visual Basic and here Macros. So Visual Basic brings up the Visual Basic editor, and that allows us to add our macro, and Macros enables us to run it once added. So we'll click the Visual Basic button, and this brings up our Visual Basic editor. Now don't worry if your editor doesn't look quite like this. There's not much we need to interact with here. The only thing we really need is this Project Explorer on the left here. And if you can't see this, go to View, Project Explorer, and click, and this will bring it up. So the next question is how we add our macro. In Word, you have what's called the normal template. And this is a Word template that's opened every time you open Word. And this can be used to store macros, which are then available every time you open Word. So this is the best place to store any macro that you're going to want to use on multiple documents. I have a load of macros stored in my normal template, and I use them every time I open Word. They're linked to buttons and everything else. So how are we going to add this specific macro? All we need to do is to right click on Normal here, and go to Insert Module. And you can see here, I've got this Module 1 here. We can ignore this one. This was one I added earlier. Here's Module 1. It's been added. It's a blank module. This is just like a text file. And all we need to do is copy and paste the macro into this window. And I've already copied it, so I'm just going to go right click and go paste. And there is our macro. Now, we're not quite there yet. We need to add in what are called libraries. And this note here, references required, is what that's all about. So because we're sending emails, we need to enable this macro to talk to Outlook. So that's why the Outlook library is there. In addition, to generate the text of the email, we actually have to use the mail merge to save an HTML document. We then read that document into the email. And to read it, we require this Microsoft scripting runtime. So let's add these references. All we need to do is go up here to Tools and go to References. And then we scroll down somewhere into the middle where we'll find Microsoft Outlook Object Library. And if I scroll down, we should find the scripting runtime here. And having checked the boxes next to them, we click OK. And that's all we need to do to enable these libraries to be used by this macro. So our macro is now set up and ready to go. And so we can close down the VBA editor. And so here we are back in the Explorer where we'll open up the data. So here we are in Excel where we have our data in an Excel spreadsheet. For any mail merge, we know that we need to have the field headings in the top row and the data underneath it. We've just added a little bit of blue formatting to make it easy to read. Now the first column here, full name, this will be used later, so let's ignore it for now. Second field, known as. This is the only field that appeared in the body of the email as part of the mail merge proper. And once that's in there, we can now ignore it. The remaining 12 fields are all used by the macro to generate the email. And it's important that we get the headers of these fields correct, otherwise they won't be recognized by the system. So if you've got a typo in one of the headers, it will simply be ignored and you won't get the result you want. So the headers are to CC, BCC, subject, importance, sensitivity, read receipt, which is all one word, delivery receipt and delivery time, both also one word, account, send as, one word, and attachment. These headers are case insensitive, so you don't have to worry about capitalization, but please note the lack of spaces between words. Now, before we run through all of the fields, please note that you can ignore any field that you don't want to use. So if you don't want to have a read receipt or a delivery receipt, you can simply remove the fields. There you go. They're gone. I don't have to worry about them anymore. Any field that's not present will simply be ignored. And equally, if you leave a field blank, so example importance here, but leave the column in there, it will equally be ignored. And when I say it's ignored, for something like importance, you'll just use the default that's set for your Outlook. So importance, the default is typically normal, and if yours has been overridden, you'll know about it. A fun thing to note is that all of these fields can be written in explicitly or can be generated using formulas, and indeed we'll do that for the subject. So let's look at what we can do with the fields. The to box, pretty self-explanatory. We have the address that we're sending the email to. This should be a full email address and not just the person's username. If you want to have multiple email addresses, simply separate them with a semicolon. The CC and the BCC box are exactly the same, and you can specify a CC and a BCC field. I'm going to add in a CC example. Let's send this one to myself. There we go. And just undo that to remove the hyperlink. The BCC box, we're going to ignore. One thing to note is that if you don't provide a valid email address, that is one containing the @ character, in at least one of the two CC and BCC fields, the row will not cause an email to be created and no attempt will be made to send an email. So removing the email address or even replacing the @ sign with something else like a question mark or a hash will cause that row to be ignored by the macro. So the subject, let's create a custom subject. Now the scenario we used to create the PDFs was an end of year letter. Our end of year letter was very simple, it just had a compliment in it because we were nice like that, but we want our subject to keep with that theme, and therefore we're going to have a nice, friendly Happy New Year and a name in our subject. So we're going to create this using a formula. We'll use the equals, and then we'll quote, and then we'll go happy, new year, and then ampersand to combine text together, Adam Griffith, and then just for effect, we'll put an exclamation mark on the end. So there we go. There is our subject line, and I can just double click on the corner here, and the forwarder will automatically create it for all of the recipients. So one advantage of this, yes, you can use formulas to create all of your mail merge data. Now the importance, we're going to make this high. You can use high, normal, or low in this field. It is case insensitive, but you have to use the exact words other than that. My default is set to normal, so I'm overriding it with a high. Sensitivity, my default is also normal, but I'm going to call this one personal. Now the sensitivities you can use are personal, confidential, private, and normal. At this point, if I hadn't deleted them, we would have got to the delivery receipt and read receipt fields. If you do want to request either of these receipts, then simply put a true, a yes, or a Y into these fields. And if you want to turn off a delivery receipt or read receipt, put in a false, no, or N. Next up, delivery time. Now this one's a little bit involved because you can put in a number of different values and get different effects. The most obvious way of defining a delivery time is using what's called a date time. And this is a combination of date and time. And I can type one in here. Keeping with our theme, we want to send this before people go off on their Christmas breaks, which means we're going to send it out on Friday the 18th of December 2020. And we want to send it out before people go home. We'll sort of make it 15:30 so that early leavers get it as much as people who stay late. So there we go. That will now send out on the 18th of December 2020 at 3:30 in the afternoon. One of the issues that people might have with a date time is that if you lose the formatting, it's hard to get back. Let me show you what I mean. Here's our date time. If I format this in a general format, it just turns into a weird number. This number marks the number of full days after the 31st of December 1899, and the 0.645 represents 0.645 a day, or 3:30 in the afternoon. So this number is, in fact, a date time, however, it's just not formatted correctly. And if you want to bring that to formatting, we can't use a date, because it just gives us a date, and we can't use a time, because it just gives us a time. So we have to dive in here to more number formats, and if you go to custom here, and this one here, DDMMYYHHMM, that one is our date time, and this returns us back to what we're dealing with. So if you're doing this and you're struggling to get the date time appearing, it may be because of formatting, so do check that out. Now we can just put in a date, and if we put in a date, it will be sent at midnight at the start of whatever that date is. And we can put in a time, at which point it will be sent at the next instance of that time. So if you're doing this in the afternoon and you put in 9 o'clock in the morning, it will be sent the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, I'm going to delete this because we don't really want to have our deliveries delayed. One final note on deliveries is if you put a date or a date time within the past, it's simply ignored and the email is sent immediately. Next up, we have these fields account and send as, and the account is the actual account you use to send the email, and this will be the one that saves the sent item. Now, typically, this is the only account you have in your Outlook. If you've got multiple accounts, you'll know about it, and you'll use this to select an account other than your default account. To select a specific account, you need to provide the full email address of that account, not a username. It's going to be the full email address because that's how it identifies it. The send as box is a bit more useful. Microsoft Exchange allows you to be set up so you can send as or send on behalf of either a person or a team. Now this feature needs to be enabled by your admin, but if it is, you can put in the email address of the person or team that you want to send as, and it will be used. Now the choice between send as and send on behalf of is done by your admin, and it will pick whichever one is set up by your admin. If you're set up with both, which is technically possible, that means you're set up as send as. So use the full email address and you can send as a person. For example, an assistant can send as, say, the CEO to give a letter a nice official ring to it, or alternatively, you can send on behalf of your team so that communications are marked with a team name and gives a unified appearance to any recipient. Finally, we get to the attachment field. Now, we've only got one here, but you can have as many as you want, and you simply need to have each field labelled either attachment, or if you want to give them unique names, you call them attachment 1 and attachment 2, and so on. And all you need to do is to make sure that it works is either it's attachment, or if it's attachment 1, there are no spaces and there's nothing else apart from the word attachment and some numbers. So you can have attachment 5250 if you really want to. That will work just as well as attachment 1. And you can have as many columns as you want. So if an email has 5 attachments to it, then you will need 5 columns for each of those 5 attachments. However, if all the emails have only got one attachment, which we'll do in this one, you only need one attachment field. So let's get rid of the other one. Okay, so how do we identify the attachment to the system? What we need to do is use the full file path. And let me show you how we identify that. So here is our Windows Explorer window again, and our attachments are in this folder called PDFs. And the full file path is the combination of the folder path, which is up here in the address bar, followed by the file name. And one way we can identify a full file path of a file is to hold down the Shift key, right-click on the file, and by holding down the Shift key, the contextual menu gets this option here called Copy as Path. So we click on that. Now when we go back to our spreadsheet, we can paste in the data, and there it is, the full file path. So it would be quite laborious to go through each and every one of our attachments and add them individually. So let me show you a little technique we can use to check and add our attachment file names to this document. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to our Windows Explorer and use Control-A to select all, and then hold down Shift, and we'll copy all of the file paths. So this is now copied 5 of them. And I want you to imagine that you're sending, say, 150 PDFs. So there's going to be a lot of them there. And what we need to do is make sure that they're all available to send as much as to add in the correct file paths. So having copied those, I'm going to create a new sheet, and we will paste in the file paths. And I'm quickly just going to label this. We'll call this one file paths. And I'm going to turn it into a table for ease of reference. My table has headers, thank you very much. Expand that, and we'll call the table files. Now I apologise if you haven't used tables much. All I've done is put some order to the data, but fundamentally here is a list of all the files that are available. Now what we want to do is we want to line up each of the file paths with the correct row using the unique identifier, which in this case is the person's full name. And the technique we're going to use is a VLOOKUP with wildcards. And let me show you how this works. I'm hoping you've used a VLOOKUP before, even if you haven't used this exact formulation. So the first thing we want to do is, rather than looking up a value like the person's name, we're going to use the person's name with wildcards on either end of it. And what this tells Excel to do is not look up a cell which exactly matches, but look up a cell which contains that bit of text anywhere within it. So for the sake of the file path for Adam Griffith, which is here, down here, this would say anywhere where we have Adam Griffith, and it will match on this one, but wouldn't match on any of the others because they don't contain Adam Griffith. So come back to the data. The way we set this up is go equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value starts with a star. Then we use the ampersand to combine text together. We'll go across to column A, which is the full name, and then we'll ampersand in another star like this. So if you look up in the formula bar here, it's star, A2, and star. So it's star Adam Griffith star. So that's the value we're going to look up. The table array we're going to look it up in is the table, and we want to return the value from the first column because we want to look up the file path itself. So we can use that, but we still want the false because it is an exact match. Yes, it's got wildcards, but we want it to exactly match Adam Griffith. So there's our formula, and I'll press return, and we'll have to expand this quickly. Here it is. It has somehow managed to retrieve Adam Griffith from that table. And if I double click again, it will fill it down, and all of the names have been filled in. Now, you may think this is a long and convoluted way of doing this, because you could have just simply used a text string and combined it with all of this stuff. But this will work in any place where you've got a specific identifier that is somewhere within a file name, and this will make it quite easy. There's another advantage, which I'll show you. If, for whatever reason, Adam Griffith's email doesn't exist, and simulate that, I'll just delete that data from the cell, and there we go. So we've only got 4 PDFs available to us. When we come back here, we find we've got a big NA, so a big red flag, and we can quickly check for that to make sure that the PDFs are available. This is much better than assuming we've got a PDF available to us and then finding it doesn't get sent out. So we send out a rather foolish looking email that says here's an attachment, and it hasn't got an attachment. So there it is. I'll quickly undo that so that Adam Griffith email comes back in. So there's our data. It has been set up. Now before I go, as a bit of a pickup, I have realised I haven't added in an example for the send as field. So I'm just going to pick Charlotte Murray, and I'm going to send this from demo@ymnos.com. Now demo is a SharePoint site and a team that I've created for demonstration purposes. And so we'll see this email will go out in the name of demo. So that little pickup done. Let's save this and go back and do the mail merge. Okay, so reopening the docx email, we can check in mailings that we've we're properly set up. Here it is, edit recipient list, and we can see all the data is available. We can scroll across. It's definitely read it. There's all the attachments and everything else. So we know we're good to go. So let's run this, and we'll do this, first of all, into drafts. To run this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the mail merge over to the right-hand side of the screen here. And so here we have it. On the right, we have the mail merge template, and on the left, we have our drafts box of the email system so that you can see the drafts as they appear. So now let's see how the macro works. If I click on developer, I go to macros. I've removed all the other macros from this system, so we've only got one, enhance mail merge to email, and all we need to do is make sure it's selected and click run. And the first thing we get is we get a nice little message box here that says mail merge to email will proceed for 5 records. Click yes to send them immediately, no to save the emails in draft, and cancel to abort. And note that we've got the no as the default option, so that at the very worst you create a load of drafts and don't inadvertently send a bunch of emails. So if I press cancel, it's always good to have an option to bail out at the last minute. This will just simply end the procedure and we won't do anything with the data. So I'm going to have to rerun it, and I'm going to click no to save the emails into draft. So I click no, and we've got a bit of a flashy thing as each document is created, but on the left hand side here you can see we've created 5 emails all ready to go, each with attachment and everything else. So let's have a quick look. Beth's email, here it is, was set up to CC myself, so there's a CC box, and we can see here the attachment has worked. Next thing to note is that if we actually click on this little arrow on the tags button, we get the properties, and we can see that the importance is set to high, the sensitivity is set to personal, and we haven't requested delivery or read receipts, but we could have, and the delivery delay has not been set. So the settings have been set to what we hoped. Now, one slight problem with this system, and I don't honestly understand why, is that the image doesn't display in drafts. Now, it does send, so when we send the email, it will work, but it doesn't display in drafts, and I'm not sure why that is, but don't worry about that if you see it. That's gone through the draft. We're pretty happy with this, so I'm going to close this. I'm going to now delete all of these drafts, and let's take a deep breath and send all the emails. So I'll click back on macros again, and I'll click run, and I'm going to click yes there. So this is going to go directly to sending all the emails. Remember, we've checked them in draft, so we're happy with the content, and we're ready to go. So I click yes, and the computer does 5 mail merges, creates 5 emails, and here is one of the emails that's been sent. We can see here that it says Happy New Year, Charlotte Murray. We can see here that it has been sent from demo. And if we hover over this, we see it's a private group. It's the team that we used for demonstrations. It's tagged as personal with sent with high importance. We've got the attachment, and the image indeed has appeared now. So we are happy with that. So that's how we can do an enhanced mail merge with attachments and importance and the ability to send as other things and a custom subject, all using simply word mail merge to email plus a macro. So now, the moment you've all been waiting for, let us go through the macro itself. Okay, so we'll bring up the Visual Basic editor and have a look at the macro. Now, as mentioned earlier, this macro is longer and more complex than the one we did for the mail merge to PDF, and so I will be going through this a little bit more at a higher level, assuming some knowledge of VBA. So quickly running through it, the first thing is this note to add references. We've already done the act of adding the references here, so we won't do that again. Second up, we have a series of variables that we have declared. So the first thing we do is we set the variable to the active document mail merge. Now the active document is the document front and center when we click the run of the macro, and therefore is the one with the mail merge set up in it. But just in case you click around or anything else while it's running, we want to make sure we've tagged that as the one that we're using for the mail merge throughout. Next up, all we do here is we check that the mail merge has been set up, so it's got a data source and is ready to go. This is where we present a message box to the user saying, first of all, the number of records that will be processed, so you get a feel for how long it's going to take, and gives you the option to send the emails, to save and draft, or to cancel. So if it says cancel, we exit the sub, we just get out of there. If it says yes, then we set this thing called send flag to true, and the only other option is no, but we use case else to pick up everything else, and we say send flag is false. Having done that and knowing that we're proceeding, we will set this Outlook app to the Outlook application and the FSO to this file system object. The way we convert the mail merge into an email is that we will save it as an HTML file, and then we'll reread it and put that into the email. So we need to have a location to save the file to and a file name for that. And what we do is we use the existing temporary file system that exists in Windows. So what this does is it uses this file system object to actually get a temporary name. So normally a temporary name is a combination of letters and numbers followed by the extension temp. We're going to remove the temp. We'll be needing just the letters and numbers later on. So we'll set that up here. So next up we have this for loop, which will loop through each of the records in the mail merge. So it goes from 1 all the way through to the record count, which is the number of records. And so with record number set, the first thing we do is we set what's called the active record in the mail merge to the record number. So next up, what we're doing is we're just checking that we have a valid or a seemingly valid address somewhere in the data. One advantage of this is removing the email address or even replacing the @ sign with something else like a question mark or a hash will cause that row to be ignored by the macro. And what this does is this sets this Boolean quantity, which is a yes, no, true, false quantity, to false, and then it runs through each of the fields in the mail merge data source, and if the field name matches to 2cc or bcc, then it tests whether the contents of the field contains this @ character, and if it does, we set the flag to true and we exit the for, so we actually get all the way out to here. This is the first time you'll see this is trim lcase df.name. All we're here trying to do is trim removes preceding and trailing spaces and lcase converts to lowercase. And what this does is it makes the df.name, which is the name of the field, can be case insensitive, and if someone's inadvertently put a space at the end or at the beginning or something, that won't cause it any problems. Okay, so we get to this line, and this is where we test whether or not an email address has been found. And if it has, then we'll continue. Otherwise, we'll just ignore this row and move on to the next one. So now we need to save the document as HTML, and we do this by specifying this field as sent new document. We choose to have only one record go into this new document, so we set the first and last record to the same record number. This is a bit like saying print from page 1 to 1, you only get page 1. Finally, we execute it. So this will generate a new Word document, which will be front and center, so it becomes the active document. We'll just tag this with this variable called single document, so that just in case someone clicks around, we won't actually lose the document and start saving a different one. There's only 2 things here, so it's very, very unlikely, but just in case. So single doc save as. Here we're going to save our document as an HTML file in the temporary folder. So environ temp, that just pulls up the user's temporary folder. And here's our temp file name again. So we just created this file path here, which is the temporary folder with a \, then the temporary file name and temp at the end. And the file format we've specified, if I scroll over a bit, to file format filtered HTML. So that is an HTML file generated by Word from the mail merge. Once we've done that, we can close it. Next step, we're going to read the HTML file back into a variable called mail body. So this we use this thing called a file system object. We open a text file. Here's the same file name, and we just read the whole lot into this string called mail body. So that's effectively created the HTML code which defines the email with all the formatting and everything else that we want. So next up, we're ready to create our email in Outlook. So we set this variable Outlook mail to being a new mail item, a new email, ready to be populated. And we will check that the body format is HTML so that it can receive the HTML text that we've just generated. Now here's where things get a little bit complicated. When Word saves the HTML file, any images are saved in a folder which has the name of the file, i.e. temp file name, and then _ files. So what we want to do is scan through that folder and pick up all the images and attach them to the email. And by attaching them to the email, they're then available to be presented within the body of the email itself so that any images appear in the email. So the way we do that is fso get folder.files simply lists all the files that are available in this folder, which is in the temp folder, followed by temp file name _ files, i.e. the attached files to the HTML. And for each of the files, we check to see whether the file name is referenced in the mail body as an image. And images are referenced as src, followed by the file name _ files and then the name. So this checks for a very specific tag in the HTML, which indicates that the file is included as an image. And if it finds it, which means that the in string is just greater than 0, then we add the image to the mail. And this 1 and a 0 specifies that it is hidden and not included in the main body of the email. So having done that, we then also replace this source tag within the HTML of the email with an alternative value, which is actually the source's CID and then the name. And for our purposes here, that simply means the image is contained in the attachment rather than in some folder on your computer. So having done that, modified the HTML, we can then add the HTML into the body of the mail. So this will now read it all and it will look at it and go, well, I can find all my images, they're attached to me already and I know where they go, so all images will display correctly. Next up, we need to run through all of the data fields and add them or change them as required. And this is set up in a very relaxed fashion so that any additional fields that aren't recognised, any fields that are omitted, anything else, do not cause errors, they're just ignored. So what we do is we'll go through each and every data field of the mail merge. Now some of these will be included in the body of the mail, like the known as field, and what will happen with those is it just simply won't match anything and therefore be ignored. Equally, if it doesn't find, for example, the delivery receipt field, it doesn't matter, it just doesn't change anything, it doesn't worry. And the first thing we do is we actually check whether the value is not blank. So if you left a value blank, it means you're ignoring it, and this tests for that. So next up, we've got another select case, and we set up the thing we're having a look at, which in this case is the name of the field. It's converted to lowercase and with leading and trailing spaces removed. And we have a look at the options we have. So the first thing, is it the to field? If it is, then we simply add the value to the to field of the mail. If it's CC, we add it to the CC field. If it's BCC, we add it to the BCC field. And if it's subject, we add it to the subject field. And you can see that if, for example, it doesn't find the BCC field in the mail merge data, it simply won't ever try and write the BCC field into the email, so it will remain blank. Next up, if the field is for importance, then we want to have a look to see if any of the allowable values are provided, which is high, normal, and low. We use another select case for that, in this case looking at the value rather than the field name. And again, we trim it and we lowercase it just in case of any spurious spaces or capitalization. And if it's high, we set to high. If it's normal, we set to normal. If it's low, we set to low. And of course, if it's something that's unrecognizable, then we would simply ignore it, and therefore the importance will remain at the default for Outlook, which is typically normal, but could have been set something differently. Sensitivity is very similar, except we've got confidential, personal, private, and normal. Next up, read receipt. We said we accepted all values of true, yes, and y. If you feed in the Boolean true, that's the true in capitals centered in a cell, that will actually be converted into this by this trim function here. So this will accept both true as a word and true as the kind of Excel cell value that's in capitals. Anyway, if it finds a yes, it will set it to true. If it finds a false, it will set it to false. This can be used to override a default for read receipt. And finally, if it doesn't find anything, it just leaves it as it is with the default. Delivery receipt is exactly the same, so we move swiftly on from there. Right, so next up we have the delivery time, and this might take a little bit more explanation. So the first problem we face is that due to formatting problems, the datetime value from Excel may be just simply a value. You saw when we did the video earlier and I reformatted the datetime, it turned into a value of about 44,000, or it may be a date. So this tests for it being numeric, which is a number, or a date. And if either of those are true, it proceeds, otherwise it will just ignore it. So if you write hello in the field, it will just ignore that. We want to test whether or not it is a time that is in the past. So a time in Excel, and indeed in mail merge, is any datetime value which is less than 1, which is essentially a period of 24 hours. And so this looks for it not only being a time, which is less than 1, but a time that's less than the current time. And the current time is simply now, which is a date time of now, minus date, which is today's date. So this would end up with the time part of the date time only. So this simply tests for, is the time in the past today? And in which case it defers the delivery time to the date plus 1 day plus the time that was specified. So if you specify 1 o'clock in the morning, unless you're actually sending this at about 12:30 at night, then it is likely to go, this is tomorrow, 1 o'clock in the morning. Next up, we test if the date value is less than 1. And this test is for a time. A time is less than 1, a date time is going to be greater than 1. And if it is, then we know it's not a time that's in the past today, it's going to be in the future today, so we simply use the date and the time that is given. So for example, if you give this 2300 hours, 11 o'clock in the evening, then this will most likely be in the future, and this will add it to today's date. So the deferred date will be today at 2300 hours. So finally we get to here. We know it's not a time, so it has to be a date, but nevertheless we check to make sure that it is actually in the future. And if it is, we set it to that. If it's in the past, there's no point in having a deferred delivery, so we just ignore it. So that's what this does. Adds a little bit of data correction and value add to the input, but the result is that we have a valid delayed delivery. Next up, we have account. Now, for this one, we can't just set the account based on the string. We actually have to search for the account and then set it. So what we do is we run through every single account in Outlook, and then if we find an account that matches the value provided, remember the value is a full email address, then we use that account to specify the send using account, and then we just stop checking accounts. If we don't find any matching account, then this will simply be ignored. Almost at the end, we have the send as field, and all this does is check that we have a valid email address, and then if so, then we use the send on behalf of name field and we set that to the value. And send on behalf of, interesting enough, does both send as and send on behalf of. The decision is made in the server based on the settings for that person. So finally we get to the attachments, and because we allow attachments to be both the word attachment and the word attachment followed by any numbers, we have to stop checking for the exact name of the field and instead use a more complex test. But all this does is it says if the first part of the trimmed lowercase name, first 10 characters, is attachment, and on top of that, either after that is nothing at all or a number, is numeric, then we will count that as a valid attachment. We add the file defined by the file path here to our email. So finally, we end the select, that's the test for the name of the field. We end the if, which is the test for the data value being blank, in which case we just ignore the field, and we move on to the next field. So once all that is done, it's gone through all the fields, then we will be ready to send the email or save it in drafts. So right at the beginning, we had a message box that popped up and said, do you want to send them or save them in drafts? And that set this thing called send flag. So we test that, and if it was set, then we send the email, and if it wasn't set, then we close the email when saving it. Finally, for good practice, we clear the Outlook Mail variable, we set it to nothing, and that basically releases it from that email. And closing up all of the things, end if, this is just a test for whether a valid address is present in the row of data. And then once that's done, we move on to the next record. So now record number will go to 2, and we'll run the whole process again. Once it's gone through all the records, we end the sub because we've sent or saved all of our emails. So thank you for watching. I hope you found that useful. If you haven't watched it before, please do check out the video where we created the PDFs using Mail Merge and another macro. In addition, please do go to our website. We have a lot of other articles and helpful tips and tricks which will help you systematize your work and reclaim your life. So thanks for watching. See you next time.